good morning or good night, as I suppose as the case may be. Excited to be here with all of you today. Thank you to all of the organizers, the moderator, as well as to Federica and Timo for a couple of wonderful, thought-provoking presentations. So I'm talking to you all today about Seng Zhao and contradiction. He's a visionary early Madhyamaka, early Chinese Madhyamaka thinker, late Qin dynasty, but I'm sort of going to skip through all of the biographical background and just sort of hit the ground running with the thought. Okay. Okay, so where we end up with Seng Zhao is a two-sided double negation on both sides of a given moment of cognition, the subject and the object side. But he doesn't start there. He starts in this kind of half historical, half envisaged position that he calls the Doctrine of Names. He discerns the contours of his own philosophical position from out of the wreckage of this kind of a scarecrow position that has certain resemblances to things in Confucius. Confucius, of course, say things like "bi zhengming, ming bu zheng to shi bu sheng." The names must be regulated. Nothing can be accomplished without regulating the names. Xunzi will say similar things in his zhengming chapter. So the Doctrine of Names posits as the condition sine qua non for a thing's communicability, the one-to-one match between a reality, shi, or mark, xiang, and a name, Ming. So in the Doctrine of Names, Seng Zhao has a near proxy for the fundamental assumption against which his philosophical methodology is aimed. The Doctrine of Names assumes only two bivalent and mutually exclusive possibilities. Either A, the name or subjective act of knowing in fact matches dang to, and thus really knows, obtains to the existent reality, or otherwise there is no such match, in which case there is no knowing and nothing whatsoever that is known, neither any name nor anything so named. So through the voice of his imagined objector, Seng Zhao lays out the bare bones commitments of the Doctrine of Names, say that things cannot communicate themselves, fu wui zi tong. In order to render them communicable, names are established, li ming, yi tong wu. So anything can be rendered communicable, tong, only vis-a-vis this one-to-one match between the designating name and the thing so designated. One name matches with exactly one reality with exactly one name. So Seng Zhao will want to drive an insuperable wedge between these two poles, names, ming, and realities, shi, and denies either one of them the power to be the singular cause of the other. And he'll tell us, so things do not derive their reality from names. Names are not brought about simply by virtue of their being things. And thus, zhendi, du jing yu mingjiao zhi wai, the ultimate truth dwells in sovereign stillness beyond the Doctrine of Names. Put a pin in that. So whether we set out from the name first to establish its corresponding reality, or on the far side, first with the thing, in retroactive pursuit of what names it, both directions of this causal sequence and the Doctrine of Names imply as condition sine qua non of a fully constituted and communicable thing, the one-to-one match between name and thing, designation and designated reality. So if the umbilical linkage between names and the allegedly corresponding realities of the things so named has been severed, are there still things to be spoken of after all? So tells us here, so ming shi wu dang, since names and realities do not correspond to each other, wan wu an zai, where in the world are the myriad things to be found? If Seng Zhao asks, did the 10,000 things, where did the 10,000 things come down? If not on the side of the name, which knows, on the subject side, which tallies with the thing, or on the thing side, on the far side, with the thing known in properly representing it. For Seng Zhao has just discounted these two options. Then where then do the 10,000 things come down? So remember, Seng Zhao had told us above that zhendi zu jing yu mingjiao zhi wai, that ultimate truth dwells beyond the Doctrine of Names. Now the 10,000 things, locatable, we're being told, now on neither side of the causal sequence between names and realities, realities and names, can only then also be situated, we might think, beyond the doctrine of names. But then are we faced with two separate beyonds of the doctrine of names, the ultimate truth on the one hand, and the 10,000 things in their myriad determinacies on the other? Seng Zhao will opt decidedly time and time again for the oneness of these two beyonds of the doctrine of names. These two beyonds are, he'll want to say, a single double-sided thing, a single suchness split in two. So the sage identifies in each thing, trying to see how these two dimensions, ultimate truth on the one hand, and the 10,000 things in their myriad, variegated, provisional determinacies somehow coincide, overlap. The sage identifies in each thing with its constitutive self-vacancy, this strange little character, 秩序, 万物之秩序, its self-vacancy of any substantiating name, of any substantial mark or reality that would alone make it itself. But crucially, each thing is uniquely empty of anything that would make it itself. It's not just some monolithic emptiness. Emptiness is split within itself between the provisional determinacies of the 10,000 things. But crucially, right, each thing is uniquely empty of itself. For the self-vacancy of a thing is as much a hollowing out as an opening up through the slack of itself. It's coming short of itself into the singular landscape of surrounding otherness, which is now seen in its thoroughfare with the thing in question. It is through just this intercourse carried out in the place of its self-vacancy that a thing is set forth in its unique provisional determinacy. So we're told here that the sagely mode of engaging with things is to identify with their self-vacuity. 圣人之于物也，即万物之秩序. And how could it be that the sage, in striving to make them connect, would have to wait on some master to come around and hack things up? The thing's emptiness or self-vacancy just is the nature of this form within which it is arrayed into its surroundings. And the provisional determinacy is, on the converse, then set forth only through the numinous intercourse carried out in the place of its vacancy of any name, mark, or reality that would suffice on its own to make it itself. So the 10,000 things need not wait on some masterful cut to hack them up in this way or that, just to make connective passage between them. We'll recall the opening gauntlet in the objection above from the interlocutor in Bora Wuzhilun in the prajñā without knowing essay, who was tasked with advocating for the doctrine of names. Things cannot communicate themselves. In order to render them communicable, names are established. The sage must intervene at the level of things in order to make them communicate. The doctrine of names assumes that one, or the other, between a designation, a name, and a designated reality is capable of grounding the aptitude of the other's fixation to it. Either a reality capable of grounding the name's representational adequacy, or a name capable of directly obtaining, tallying to the reality which it calls out. So Seng Zhao takes issue precisely with this insistence that things cannot communicate themselves, and instead must be made to communicate. And furthermore, he tells us they connect up with each other, always already through the place in each where it is vacant of itself. The sage comes to passage in just this spontaneous communicative intercourse of the 10,000 things, in the locus of each's uniquely located lack of itself. This is the mode in which Seng Zhao's sage engages with things. So we've already seen the way that this position breaks down. It breaks down into two sides, on each side of which we'll see that there's a double negation operation being carried out. So on the one hand, on the objective side, so on the side of the thing, on the far side, this negation negates that things are existent, as well as that things are altogether non-existent. And then on the subjective side, on the near side, as it were, the negation negates that prajñā, wisdom, knows or brings any bivalent judgment to bear on things whatsoever, as well as negates that prajñā knows not. So on the one hand, things can be said simultaneously to exist, in their provisional determinacies vis-a-vis the negation of their complete non-existence, and not to exist substantially. On the other hand, things can be said to be both inexistent vis-a-vis the negation of their substantial existence and not altogether inexistent. So up at the top here, in a little exchange with Liu Yimin, he tells us, since they do not exist, he does not cling to them. Since they do not exist, he does not renounce them. Since he does not renounce them, things wondrously abide in identity with the ultimate. 非有所以不惧，非无所以不舍，不舍故妙存即真, wondrously abide in the ultimate. So non-existence and existence figure here not as two bivalent, mutually exclusive determinations of a thing. So as if a thing would have to be either existent or non-existent, and only one at the expense of the other. Where this is thought to have to exclude the possibility of their coincidence for something to be both inexistent and non-existent. They figure with Seng Zhao rather as two inalienable aspects of anything's appearance whatsoever, considered in and through this double negation as a totality of relations. So even though their existence, the existence and the non-existence of things are referred to differently, at their utmost, they're one 其之一. So remember, on the Doctrine of Names, a real name was said to have to match to exactly one known reality. This one-to-one match alone would qualify it on the Doctrine of Names to knowledge of the thing. Thus, there are, for the proponent of the Doctrine of Names, only these two bivalent possibilities. If it attains to such a match, then it knows. And if it does not obtain to such a match, then it does not know. So looking back up at this quote here, so this is now the objector speaking, the advocate of the Doctrine of Names. He wants to insist non-knowing can never be called knowing, and knowing can never be called not knowing. If knowing correctly describes the mind of the sage, then not knowing ipso facto cannot be correct. And if non-knowing captures it, then knowing does not apply. He wants to make sure that the barrier, the border between knowing and not knowing, is not crossed, is made to hold its ground, and prevent any kind of each one trespassing on the other's territory. So the objector in prajñā without knowing comes up over and over again against this same stumbling block in his commitment to the bivalence of knowing and not knowing. His commitment to the Doctrine of Names means he refuses to budge on just this. That to know is just to know, and not to know is just not to know. Full stop. So Seng Zhao explodes this assumption on the objector's argument, the condition of the bivalence of knowing and not knowing. He tells us instead, 非物质故不取, 有非之然后不取. So it is not because the sage doesn't know the object that he does not cling to it, and it is also not that he knows it and then in addition does not cling to it. Rather, non-clinging is precisely the knowing. This is why he can be non-clinging and yet knowing. 故能不取而知. So the sage's activity takes up in just this locus, within which anything has originally come unclung from itself. And this original self-unclinging alone is the condition of its exposure to the causes and conditions that converge under the banner of its singular provisional determinacy. To know it in this sense is just to be aware of it, such as it is, however it is, without in any way clinging to its being some such way as opposed to otherwise. Like a mirror that reflects whatever comes before it, without having any vested interest in what chances upon its surface from one moment to the next. The sage's non-clinging only just mirrors the constitutive exposure in the heart of the thing itself to an outside that moves through it as its very own self-materialization. So any so-called knowledge that it tries to get beneath the surface of things, right? As it were, seeking after the self-possessed ground of the thing's substantiality, the real core of it, the name or reality by which the thing would be fixed in place as it is rendered ipso facto oblivious to the functioning lack of any such a fixation, and is rendered equally oblivious to the fact that this functioning lack of any such a fixation is alone the condition of the possibility of its appearing as it does. In other words, this functioning lack of any such a fixation is the very thing to be known, that there's nothing outside of it to be known. So, but does this commit Seng Zhao to some real, true contradiction at the level of things themselves? Seng Zhao, I want to argue, opens the gates to a trivialist contradiction, so-called in contrast to the dialetheist position, because it is properly unlimited in extent, unlocalizable at this site rather than that site, or vice versa. The two truths, ultimate and conventional, figure two inalienable, internested aspects of the appearance to a subject of anything whatsoever. The oneness of non-existence and existence, the non-knowing and knowing, is not merely a oneness as opposed to a two-ness, a sameness as opposed to a difference. So there's this wonderful passage also in prajñā without knowing, where all of this sort of comes to a fore. Within there is the illumination with its unique reflectivity. Without are the realities of the 10,000 dharmas. Although the 10,000 dharmas are realities, without this reflection on them, they are not obtained. Inner and outer have to interact to produce this power of reflection. This is what the sage cannot make the same, the functions. So that's on the one hand what the sage is powerless to make the same. And now on the other side, internally, although there is reflection, there is no knowing. And externally, although there are these realities, there are no characteristic marks. Inner and outer are quiescent and together negated. This is something that the sage cannot make different. The quiescence. So there's a twofold impotency on the part of Seng Zhao's sage. And the overlapping of these two impotencies is the site of what I'm calling this trivialist contradiction. So on the one hand, we have that which the sage is powerless to make the same, so bunongtong, the side of function, the side of difference, and all sorts of other avatars of the same figure. So the sage is powerless to make the same, the provisional positedness of the 10,000 things, cast before the disambiguating gaze of some subjective internality. He is powerless to collapse the interval between subject and object requisite for the appearance of anything whatsoever. The uncollapsible difference between internality and externality is for Seng Zhao the condition of the possibility of conventional truth, of things appearing just such as they do. And then on the other side, we have the quiescence, the sameness, what the sage is powerless to make different in things. The sage's activity, engaged through a mirror-like illumination at the shifting surface of the 10,000 dharmas, can be said to know things only by being no different from, by identifying with Dharma's own original self-vacancy of anything to be known qua mark or reality. This the sage is powerless to make different. So in response to his objectors asking him, are these two dimensions, function and quiescence, well, are they the same or are they different? He essentially replies, same difference. The functions are precisely the quiescence is precisely the functions. Yong, ji yong. Functions and quiescence are one and the same thing. Yong ji ti, quoting Lao Tzu here, Tong Shu er yiming, are emerging together but named differently, for there is no unfunctioning quiescence that serves as the controller of the functions. Gang wu yong zhi ji er zhu yu yong ye. So this nodal point between function and quiescence, between what the sage is powerless to make the same and powerless to make different, is the site of Seng Zhao's trivialist contradiction that's unlimitedly discoverable in the heart of each and every presented thing, the real mark of its singular suchness split in two. Thus, its contradictoriness consists not in some dialetheic match between the simultaneous affirmation of two incompossible contradictories on the one hand, and the corresponding divergence at the level of the objective state of affairs on the other hand. Seng Zhao's trivialist contradiction consists in the encompassing unity of the split between what the sage is powerless to make the same and powerless to make different function and quiescence. One and the same thing appears before prajñā's mirror-like illumination on some provisional aspect, born out from the intercourse of causes and conditions, and from the opposite direction, this its quiescent self-vacancy just is its opening onto difference and otherness and externality from the inside out. So I see that I'm about out of time here. Just kind of as a last word and as a way of gesturing towards sort of what's to come, in the third part of this paper, I explore various ramifications of this position, among which, so I'm thinking through various models that have recently been really brilliantly exercised. People like Graham Priest and Jay Garfield in this work on dialetheism, this view that some contradictions are true, that there's some sentences, statements, propositions, such that both A and not A are true. If something is true, then there must be something that makes it so, call it the world. If some contradictions are true, then the world must be such as to make this the case. In this sense, the world is contradictory. So there's a contradiction at the subjective sentential level, and then a homologous contradiction in the state of affairs itself. But I want to say that this isn't actually super helpful in thinking through what's going on with Seng Zhao here. For how could this framework for the simultaneous embrace of two allegedly incompossible binary cognitive commitments shed any light on the structure of Seng Zhao's prajñic activity, given its non-commitment to so much as anything's being one way as opposed to the other. So it's not that things are this way and also the opposite way, such that one of those positions would be thought to contradict the other. He disavows himself through this philosophical methodology, this double negation, from the requisite condition of their contradictoriness. So although there's no room for contradiction in this sense, in the sense that would have to be involved in calling Seng Zhao a dialetheist, nevertheless, there's a contradiction, a contradictoriness that has yet to be fully modeled, that I'm trying to think through here. Okay, I'll put a period on it at that.